At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law whispered, "He left everything to me. You get nothing." I smiled, took out a small envelope from my purse, and handed it to the lawyer. When he opened it, her face turned. "Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories." My name is Sylvia, and at 62 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing at my husband's funeral, facing the kind of betrayal that only comes from within your own family. But to understand what happened that day, you need to know who I really was, before that moment shattered everything I believed about the people I loved. For 40 years, I was Robert's wife, not just in title, but in every sense of the word. When we met in 1983, I was a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, working double shifts in the cardiac unit. Robert was a young entrepreneur with big dreams and empty pockets, trying to start his construction business with nothing but determination and a beat-up truck. I remember the day he proposed, standing in my tiny apartment, promising me he'd build us an empire. He didn't have a ring yet, just a simple band he'd made from a wire. I said yes without hesitation. When our first child came along in 1985, I made the choice that would define the next 4 decades of my life. I hung up my nursing scrubs and became the foundation that allowed Robert's dreams to flourish. While he built shopping centers and office complexes, I built our home. I raised our 3 children, Mark, Jennifer, and David, often alone while Robert worked 18-hour days establishing his business. I never complained when we ate beans and rice for months so he could make payroll for his workers. I never questioned when my own needs came last. People often ask if I regretted giving up my career. The truth is, I found my purpose in being the silent strength behind our family's success. When Robert's business nearly collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis, I didn't hesitate to call my elderly parents and ask for my inheritance early. That $150,000 saved not just our business, but the livelihoods of 30 employees who depended on us. Robert cried that night, holding me in our kitchen, promising he'd never forget what I'd sacrificed. I became the keeper of our family's traditions. Every Sunday, without fail, our dining room table was set for 12. My pot roast would fill the house with warmth as children and grandchildren gathered, sharing their weeks, their dreams, their troubles. I memorized every birthday, every anniversary, every school play and soccer game. When Jennifer went through her divorce, she lived with us for a year, and I held her through countless nights of tears. When David struggled with addiction, I was the one who drove him to rehab, visited every week, and never gave up hope. The last 2 years tested us in ways we never imagined. When Robert was diagnosed with colon cancer, I transformed into his nurse again. I learned to manage his medications, change his dressings, hold his hand through chemotherapy sessions that left him weaker each time. I slept in hospital chairs for weeks, advocating with doctors, researching treatments, becoming an expert in oncology terms I could barely pronounce. When he lost his hair, I shaved my own head in solidarity. We fought that battle together, and we won. The cancer went into remission. Through it all, I remained the quiet constant in our family's life. I never sought recognition or praise. My joy came from seeing my family thrive, from knowing that I had helped build something beautiful and lasting. I was the woman who neighbors called when they needed advice, who church members trusted with their secrets, who never spoke ill of anyone, even when they deserved it. That's who I was on the day we buried Robert, a woman who had given everything for her family. The morning sun had a way of finding Robert's face through our bedroom curtains at exactly 6:47 a.m. every day. For 40 years, I watched him wake up to that golden light, his eyes crinkling at the corners before they even opened, knowing I was already watching him. That last year, after the cancer went into remission, those mornings felt like gifts we'd stolen from fate. Our routine was sacred. Robert would shuffle to the kitchen in his worn blue slippers while I started the coffee. 2 scoops of Colombian dark roast, 1 scoop of hazelnut blend, the combination he'd perfected over decades. We'd carry our mugs to the front porch where two rocking chairs faced the street we'd called home for 35 years. The newspaper would be waiting, and we'd divide it without discussion. Sports and business for him, local news and lifestyle for me. We'd share interesting bits, reading aloud to each other while the neighborhood slowly came alive. Thursday nights were for cards. Robert and I would sit at the kitchen table playing gin rummy, keeping score on the same notepad we'd used since 1987. He was ahead by exactly 1,247 games, a fact he reminded me of weekly with that boyish grin that made me fall in love with him at 22. We'd share a bottle of wine, the inexpensive kind from the grocery store that we'd grown fond of, and talk about everything and nothing. Those Thursday nights with just the sound of shuffling cards and comfortable silence were when I felt most married to him. Every Friday afternoon, without fail, Robert would disappear for an hour and return with fresh flowers. Not expensive bouquets from the fancy florist downtown, but simple bunches from the corner market. Daisies, carnations, sometimes just wildflowers he'd spotted growing by the roadside. He'd present them to me with the same shy smile, as if he was still that young man courting me. I'd arrange them in the crystal vase his mother had given us for our wedding, and they'd brighten our kitchen table all week. Sundays were for family, of course. I'd wake at dawn to start preparing dinner, the house slowly filling with the aroma of pot roast, fresh bread, and apple pie. Robert would help me set the long dining table, counting out plates and polishing silverware while telling me stories from his week. By 2 o'clock, the house would explode with life. Mark would arrive with Rebecca and their 2 boys, always bringing too much wine. Jennifer would sweep in with her teenage daughter, arms full of desserts she insisted on contributing, even though I had plenty. David would come last, quieter since his recovery, but present and sober, which was all that mattered. Our evening walks were perhaps my favorite ritual. Every night after dinner, we'd stroll through the neighborhood we'd watched transform over the decades. Robert would hold my hand, our fingers interlaced with the practiced ease of 4 decades together. We knew every house, every tree, every crack in the sidewalk. Mrs. Patterson would wave from her garden. The Martinez kids would race past on their bikes. We'd stop to chat with Tom and Linda at the corner, comparing notes on grandchildren and retirement plans. In the garden, Robert had planted roses for our 25th anniversary. Every season I'd tend to them while he sat nearby, reading his mystery novels and occasionally looking up to tell me how beautiful they looked. Those roses became our metaphor for marriage, requiring constant care, sometimes drawing blood with their thorns, but blooming with extraordinary beauty when properly loved. Life had a rhythm then, a predictable sweetness that we'd earned through years of struggle and sacrifice. We weren't wealthy by most standards, but we were rich in all the ways that mattered. We had our routines, our traditions, our quiet love that didn't need constant declaration. We had achieved that rare thing, a marriage that had transformed from passion to partnership to something even deeper, a unity of souls that made us forget where one ended and the other began. That was our normal. That was our perfect, ordinary life before everything changed. The first crack in our perfect routine appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in early March, 3 months before Robert would leave me forever. Rebecca had called that morning, her voice honeyed with an enthusiasm I'd never heard before. "Mom Sylvia," she said, using the title she rarely bothered with, "I'm bringing lunch today. We need to spend more time together." In 5 years of marriage to our son Mark, Rebecca had never once suggested having lunch with me alone. She arrived at noon sharp, carrying bags from the expensive bistro downtown, the one where a sandwich cost what I'd spend on groceries for 3 days. Her appearance struck me as different too. Usually Rebecca dressed in sharp business suits that screamed ambition, but today she wore a soft cardigan and modest dress, almost mimicking my own style. She'd even pulled her platinum blonde hair into a gentle bun, so unlike her usual severe ponytail. We ate at my kitchen table, Rebecca asking questions about Robert's health with an intensity that felt rehearsed. How was his recovery progressing? Was his mind clear after all those medications? Did he still handle the business finances himself? Each question was wrapped in concern, but something in her gray eyes remained calculating, watching my responses like a chess player studying the board. When Robert came home early from the office, complaining of fatigue, Rebecca practically leaped from her chair to help him to his recliner, fussing over him with an attentiveness that made my stomach twist with unease. The visits became a pattern. Twice a week, then 3 times, Rebecca would appear at our door. She'd bring Robert's favorite pastries from the German bakery across town, magazines about classic cars he loved, even a rare book about World War II aircraft he'd mentioned wanting months ago. How had she remembered that? More puzzling, how had she afforded it? Mark had mentioned their finances were tight, yet here was Rebecca, showering Robert with expensive gifts. I started noticing other things. Rebecca would steer Robert into his study for private conversations about what she called investment opportunities. Through the closed door, I'd hear her melodious voice rising and falling in rhythms that sounded more like persuasion than conversation. When they emerged, Robert would look confused, rubbing his temples, while Rebecca appeared triumphant, clutching folders and documents I didn't recognize. One afternoon, I walked into Robert's study to bring him tea and found Rebecca bent over his desk, photographing documents with her phone. She straightened quickly, sliding papers into a folder with practiced ease. "Just helping Dad Robert organize his paperwork," she said, that bright smile never wavering. "You know how men are with filing." But Robert wasn't disorganized. His files were meticulous, a habit from 40 years in business. Why would he need help? The phone calls started next. Robert's cell would ring at odd hours, and he'd glance at the screen before stepping outside to answer. When I asked who was calling, he'd wave vaguely and mutter something about business matters. But Robert had handed daily operations to his management team after the cancer diagnosis. What business matters could be so urgent, so private? Rebecca began appearing at Robert's office too. His secretary, Nancy, mentioned it casually during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Rebecca's certainly taking an interest in the family business," she said. "She's there every Thursday afternoon, closeted away with Mr. Robert for hours." Thursdays, our card game days. Robert had started claiming he needed to work late on Thursdays, arriving home too tired for gin rummy. Each incident alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't quite decipher. At night, lying beside Robert as he slept, I'd study his familiar profile in the moonlight and wonder what was happening to us. This man who'd shared everything with me for 40 years now had secrets, and somehow, impossibly, my daughter-in-law had positioned herself at the center of them. But I told myself I was imagining things. This was Rebecca, Mark's wife, mother to 2 of our grandchildren. Family doesn't betray family, does it? I became an expert at explaining away what my eyes were seeing. Late at night, when doubt crept in like fog under the door, I'd lie in bed constructing reasonable explanations for everything. Rebecca was finally warming up to us after 5 years of distance. Wasn't that what I'd always wanted? For her to truly feel like part of our family? Robert and I had prayed for this, especially after watching how her coldness hurt Mark, though he'd never admit it aloud. Perhaps she was trying to learn the family business to help Mark advance. My son was brilliant with numbers but terrible at office politics, a fact that had stalled his career at his father's company. Maybe Rebecca, with her paralegal background and sharp mind, had decided to become his advocate. Yes, that made sense. She was being a supportive wife, building relationships that would benefit their family. I should be grateful, not suspicious. When my friend Patricia called one afternoon, mentioning she'd seen Rebecca at the county courthouse reviewing property records, I laughed it off. "She's probably doing research for her job," I told Patricia, though Rebecca worked for a criminal defense attorney who had nothing to do with real estate. Patricia's silence on the other end spoke volumes, but I filled it with cheerful chatter about my garden until she changed the subject. Robert's increasing confusion, which I'd noticed during Rebecca's visits, surely stemmed from his new medications. The oncologist had warned us about potential side effects from the maintenance drugs he'd need for the next year: fatigue, mental fog, difficulty concentrating, all perfectly normal for a cancer survivor. When Robert couldn't remember agreeing to meet with Rebecca about financial planning, or seemed puzzled about documents he'd apparently signed, I reminded myself that his body had been through trauma. He needed patience, not paranoia from his wife. I even rationalized the distance growing between us. Marriage has seasons, I told myself. After 40 years, we were bound to have periods where we felt less connected. The cancer battle had exhausted us both. Robert probably needed space to process his mortality, to work through the fear that the disease might return. If he found comfort in Rebecca's attention, her youth and energy reminding him of better days, who was I to begrudge him that? My daughter Jennifer noticed something was off during Sunday dinner. She pulled me aside while washing dishes, her hands deep in soapy water, as she asked, "Mom, why is Rebecca suddenly Dad's shadow, and why does Dad look so tired all the time?" I smiled, patted her shoulder, and delivered my well-rehearsed response. Rebecca was taking an interest in family history. She wanted to document Robert's business journey for the grandchildren. Such a thoughtful gesture, really. But Jennifer's eyes, so like her father's, narrowed with concern. "Mom, you don't actually believe that, do you?" I turned away, busying myself with drying plates, unable to meet her gaze. Of course I do. Rebecca is family. Family looks after family. The manila envelope I found in Robert's jacket pocket while doing laundry tested my denial to its limits. Legal papers, dense with terminology I didn't understand, with Rebecca's name appearing throughout. I stood in our laundry room holding those papers with shaking hands, my mind racing to construct an innocent explanation. Perhaps Robert was helping Rebecca and Mark with their mortgage refinancing. Maybe he was adding her to some company board for tax purposes. Business was complicated. I didn't need to understand everything. I placed the papers back exactly as I'd found them and continued with the laundry. That night, as Robert worked late again in his study with the door locked, I sat in our living room, knitting a sweater for our newest grandchild, telling myself that everything was fine. The clicking of my needles filled the silence, each stitch another small act of denial. Trust, I reminded myself, was the foundation of marriage. If I started questioning Robert now, after 40 years, what did that say about us? Everything was fine. It had to be. The Tuesday morning that shattered my carefully constructed denial started like any other. Robert had left early for a doctor's appointment, and I was sorting through the mail when I noticed our joint savings account statement. We'd always been transparent about finances, checking statements together on the first of each month. But Robert had been handling everything since his diagnosis, insisting I shouldn't worry about such things while caring for him. The withdrawal amount made me sink into the kitchen chair. $75,000. Transferred out 2 weeks ago. No explanation, no notation, just gone. 3/4 of our emergency fund, the money we'd saved for potential medical expenses, vanished like morning mist. My hands trembled as I searched for Robert's explanation. A sticky note, anything, nothing. I pulled out more statements, my breakfast coffee growing cold as I spread papers across the kitchen table. 3 more withdrawals over the past month. $15,000, $22,000, $18,000. Each one authorized by Robert, each one transferred to an account number I didn't recognize. My nursing instincts kicked in, the same methodical approach I'd used when assessing critical patients. Document everything, look for patterns, gather evidence before reaching conclusions. In Robert's study, searching for explanations, I found an appointment card tucked behind his desk calendar. Morrison and Associates estate planning attorneys, with an appointment date from 2 weeks ago, the same day as the largest withdrawal. We already had an estate attorney, Harold Brennan, who'd handled our affairs for 20 years. Why would Robert need someone new? The card's corner was torn, as if someone had tried to dispose of it quickly. The wastepaper basket beside Robert's desk yielded another clue. Crumpled beneath tissues and junk mail was a receipt from the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Lunch for two, $186, dated last Thursday. My throat tightened. Last Thursday, Robert had said he was having a routine blood test and would grab a sandwich at the hospital cafeteria. The receipt showed 2 glasses of wine, 2 entrees. The signature was Robert's, but shaky, almost childlike. My phone rang, interrupting my investigation. Mark's voice was strained. "Mom, did Dad mention giving Rebecca money for a business venture? She just put a deposit on a new Mercedes. Said Dad was investing in her consulting firm. I didn't even know she had a consulting firm." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the desk edge, forcing my voice to remain steady. "How much money, Mark?" "She won't say. Mom, what's going on? This isn't like Dad. And Rebecca's been acting strange, secretive. She keeps saying everything will make sense soon, that big changes are coming for our family." After promising Mark I'd talk to Robert, I returned to searching. In the bottom drawer of Robert's desk, beneath old tax returns, I found a folder labeled RK Consulting. Rebecca Catherine Consulting. Inside were invoices to our family business for services rendered, each one for exactly $9,999, just below the amount requiring board approval. 6 invoices over 2 months, all approved by Robert, all paid from the company account. The most damning evidence came from Robert's jacket pocket again. Not papers this time, but his phone, which he'd forgotten when Nancy drove him to his appointment. I knew his passcode, our anniversary date. His recent texts made my blood run cold. Messages from Rebecca. "Remember what we discussed. This is best for everyone. Don't mention our meeting to anyone. The lawyer says we need one more signature. Trust me, Robert, you know I care about you." Robert's responses were confused, disjointed. "Feel dizzy after the pills you gave me. Can't remember what I signed. Sylvia will be hurt. Please don't make me do this." The last exchange was from yesterday. Rebecca. "One more week and everything will be settled. Your legacy will be protected." Robert. "I'm scared." I sat in Robert's chair, his phone heavy in my hands, finally understanding. This wasn't about family bonding or business education. Rebecca was systematically dismantling 40 years of our life together, and somehow she'd convinced my husband to help her do it. Robert's death came on a humid Thursday evening, in June, 3 days after I discovered those terrible text messages. He'd been working in his study when I heard the crash. By the time I reached him, he was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face twisted in agony. "Sylvia," he gasped, his eyes wide with terror and something else, regret. "I'm sorry. She made me—" "The papers. Protect yourself." Those were his last coherent words before the ambulance arrived. The paramedics worked on him for 40 minutes. I held his hand in the ambulance, whispering 40 years of love into his ear. But somewhere between our driveway and the hospital, Robert slipped away. The official cause was massive heart failure, though the doctors seemed puzzled. His heart had been strong in recent checkups, no signs of deterioration. "Sometimes these things just happen," Dr. Martinez said, but his frown suggested otherwise. Rebecca arrived at the hospital within minutes, though Mark hadn't called her yet. She swept in wearing a black dress, as if she'd been prepared for this moment. "Oh, Mom, Sylvia!" she cried, reaching for me with dry eyes. "This is just devastating. At least he's not suffering anymore." Her embrace felt like ice, and when she pulled back, I caught something in her expression. Anticipation. The will reading was scheduled for the Monday after the funeral. Harold Brennan, our family attorney, seemed confused when Rebecca insisted it happen at a different law firm. "Mr. Morrison has the most recent documentation," she announced, producing papers that named Morrison and Associates as executors. Harold's face went pale. "But I just updated Robert's will last year. Everything was to go to Sylvia, then be divided among the children. Morrison, a young attorney with slicked back hair and an expensive suit, cleared his throat. That will has been superseded. Mr. Kingston executed new documents 2 weeks ago. He began reading in a monotone voice that made my blood freeze with each word. I, Robert Kingston, being of sound mind and body, leave my entire estate to Rebecca Kingston, my daughter-in-law, who has shown exceptional dedication to preserving my business legacy. This includes all real property, business interests, financial accounts, and personal belongings. My wife, Sylvia, has been adequately provided for through life insurance policies and will receive the mandated spousal minimum as required by law. Mark shot to his feet. This is insane. Dad would never. Rebecca's hand on his arm stopped him. Your father knew what he was doing, honey. He wanted to ensure the business stayed strong. Don't worry, I'll take care of everyone. Her smile was a serpent's promise. Jennifer was crying. David sat frozen, his recovery-fragile sobriety visibly shaking. But I remained still, watching Rebecca's performance. She produced more documents, powers of attorney, business transfers, property deeds, all dated within the last month, all bearing Robert's shaky signature. Where's the life insurance policy? I asked quietly. Morrison shuffled papers, avoiding my eyes. I'm sure Mrs. Rebecca Kingston can provide that information. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for me, though everyone could hear. There is no life insurance, Sylvia. Robert cashed it out last month. Business expenses, you understand. But don't worry, you have 2 weeks to vacate the house. I'm not heartless. The room erupted. Mark was shouting, Jennifer threatening legal action, David storming out. But Rebecca remained calm, a queen surveying her conquered kingdom. She turned to me with mock sympathy. I know this is hard, but Robert was very clear. He felt you'd become a burden during his illness. He wanted someone younger, more capable, to handle his legacy. Harold Brennan spoke up, his voice shaking with rage. Sylvia, this isn't right. We can contest. With what money? Rebecca interrupted smoothly. All accounts are frozen pending estate execution. Besides, she looked directly at me, her gray eyes cold as winter stone. Would you really want to drag Robert's name through court? Expose his final wishes as incompetent ramblings? Think of what people would say. The truth of Robert's last words to me burned in my chest. He'd tried to warn me. The full scope of Rebecca's plan didn't reveal itself until I met with Patricia, my retired FBI friend, 3 days after that devastating will reading. She'd come to the house, my house for only 11 more days, carrying a box of documents and a laptop. Her expression was grim as she spread papers across the dining room table where my family had shared countless Sunday dinners. Sylvia, Rebecca, Kingston isn't who you think she is, Patricia began, pulling out a photograph. Her real name is Rebecca Thornton. She's done this before. The photo showed a younger Rebecca at a funeral, standing beside an elderly woman who looked destroyed. Martha Hendricks, San Diego, 2018. Her husband left everything to Rebecca, who was supposedly helping with his investment portfolio. Martha died of a stroke 6 months later in a nursing home. My hands shook as I examined more documents. 3 elderly men over the past 8 years, all widowers or in troubled marriages, all leaving substantial estates to Rebecca under different surnames. She'd never been prosecuted because the wills appeared legitimate, the signatures genuine, the victims either dead or too broken to fight. How did she target Robert? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Patricia pulled up Mark's wedding announcement from 5 years ago. She researched your family extensively before she even met Mark. Court records show she was investigating Robert's net worth 6 months before she started dating your son. She knew about the construction business, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts. Mark wasn't her husband, he was her entry ticket. The evidence Patricia had gathered was staggering. Rebecca had earned a paralegal certificate specifically focused on estate law. She'd worked for 3 different elder law attorneys, each time leaving under suspicious circumstances. She'd studied pharmacology online, learning about drug interactions that could cause confusion and memory loss in elderly patients. She'd even taken courses on psychological manipulation and undue influence. "The pills?" I whispered, remembering Robert's text about feeling dizzy. Patricia nodded, showing me printouts from Rebecca's credit card. She purchased benzodiazepine and several other medications online using foreign pharmacies. Combined with Robert's legitimate cancer medications, they would cause severe confusion, memory lapses, and heightened suggestibility. She was essentially performing chemical kidnapping on his mind. But the conspiracy went deeper. Patricia had discovered Rebecca was working with Dr. Thomas Carver, a psychiatrist who'd lost his license in Nevada for elderly exploitation. "He's been providing her with prescriptions and medical cover stories. They're romantically involved. Your son has no idea." Bank records showed Rebecca had been slowly transferring money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The business invoices for her fake consulting firm were just the beginning. She'd convinced Robert to sign over power of attorney, giving her access to everything. The new will was signed during a period when Robert's medical records showed he was taking 3 times the recommended dose of confusion-inducing medications. "She's already started selling off assets," Patricia continued. "2 of Robert's commercial properties have pending sales to Shell, companies that trace back to her. The business has a buyer lined up, a competitor who's been wanting Robert's company for years. She'll destroy everything you built in weeks." The cruelest part was how she'd isolated Robert. Patricia showed me phone records where Rebecca had been intercepting calls, deleting messages, ensuring Robert heard only what she wanted. She'd convinced him that I was planning to put him in a nursing home, that the children only wanted his money, that she alone cared about his legacy. "But there's more, Sylvia," Patricia said, her voice gentle. "The night Robert died, Rebecca was at your house. Your neighbor's security camera caught her car leaving 10 minutes before you found him, and Dr. Carver prescribed a heart medication that, combined with Robert's other drugs, could trigger massive cardiac arrest. It would look natural to anyone not specifically looking for it. Murder." The word hung unspoken between us. Rebecca hadn't just stolen from Robert. She'd likely killed him when he started resisting. My husband's final words echoed. "She made me protect yourself." "Can we prove it?" I asked. Patricia smiled grimly. "We're going to try." That night, after Patricia left with her promises to help me fight, I found myself alone in the house that would soon no longer be mine. The silence was deafening. For 40 years, these walls had heard Robert's laughter, his off-key singing in the shower, his footsteps on the stairs. Now they held only the echo of betrayal and the ghost of a marriage I thought was unbreakable. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling like a mountain. Our wedding photo on the nightstand seemed to mock me. 2 young people radiating joy, completely unaware that their love story would end with deception and possibly murder. I picked up Robert's pillow, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to the fabric, and finally let myself shatter. The sobs came from somewhere deep, a place I'd kept locked since finding those first bank statements. I cried for the man who'd held my hand through 3 childbirths, who danced with me in this very room just 6 months ago when his cancer went into remission. We'd been so grateful then, so foolishly optimistic about our remaining years together. How could I not have protected him when he needed me most? Memories assaulted me like physical blows. Robert teaching Mark to ride a bike in our driveway, running alongside until Mark shouted, "Let go, Dad, I got it!" The pride in Robert's eyes that day, the same pride Rebecca had exploited and twisted. Our 25th anniversary when we couldn't afford a fancy celebration, so Robert had transformed our backyard into a ballroom with Christmas lights and played our wedding song on an old boombox. We danced until dawn, our children watching from their bedroom windows, giggling at their embarrassingly romantic parents. I stumbled to Robert's closet, running my hands along his shirts, each one a reminder of moments now tainted. The blue dress shirt he wore to Jennifer's college graduation, Had he already been under Rebecca's influence then? The lucky golf polo he insisted on wearing to every important business meeting. How many documents had he signed while wearing it, confused and manipulated? His favorite cardigan, the one I'd knitted him during his chemotherapy, worn threadbare from use. Had Rebecca been poisoning him even as I was trying to save him? The cruelest memories were the recent ones, now seen through the lens of truth. Robert's confusion when he couldn't find his reading glasses. Rebecca had been hiding them to make him more dependent. His frustration when he couldn't remember conversations. The drugs she was feeding him, stealing his brilliant mind, piece by piece. The times he'd looked at me with fear and confusion, not recognizing the woman who'd shared his bed for 4 decades, while Rebecca whispered poison in his ear. I found myself on the floor of his study, holding the last birthday card he'd given me. His handwriting, usually so strong and confident, was shaky. To my Sylvia, my anchor, my heart. Forever yours, Robert. Written just 6 weeks ago, probably during a moment of clarity between Rebecca's drug doses. Had he been trying to tell me he still loved me, even as she forced him to sign away our life? The photo album from our 40th anniversary party was my undoing. Picture after picture of Robert laughing, surrounded by family and friends, his arms always finding their way around me. In one photo, Rebecca stood in the background, already calculating, already planning. How long had she been studying us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Mark's arm around her waist in the photo made me want to scream. My poor son, used as a weapon against his own parents. I pressed my face into Robert's sweater and wailed, raw, primal sounds I didn't know I could make. 40 years of building a life, creating a family, nurturing a love that survived poverty, illness, and loss, destroyed by a woman young enough to be our daughter. The home we'd renovated together, each room holding memories of painting walls, choosing fixtures, arguing over carpet samples, soon to be sold to strangers. The garden where Robert had planted roses for our anniversary, where he'd taught our grandchildren to catch fireflies, where he'd asked me to grow old with him. Rebecca would probably pave it over for parking. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir. A cold, clear rage. I woke on Robert's study floor as dawn crept through the windows, my face still pressed against his sweater. Every joint ached from the hardwood floor, but the pain felt appropriate, matching the hollow ache in my chest. As I struggled to stand, my hand brushed against something beneath the desk's bottom drawer, a small key, taped to the underside, painted black to blend with the wood. My fingers recognized it immediately, the safety deposit box key from First National, the one Robert had gotten 30 years ago when we barely had anything worth protecting. He joked that we were keeping our vast fortune of savings bonds and my grandmother's ring safe from thieves. I'd forgotten about it entirely in recent years. Why had he hidden it here? Standing in his study, surrounded by the remnants of our life, something shifted inside me. The tears dried on my cheeks as I studied that key. Robert had hidden it deliberately, recently. The tape was fresh, not yellowed with age. His final words echoed, "Protect yourself." I made coffee with steady hands, my mind suddenly crystal clear. At the kitchen table where Rebecca had performed her false concern, I opened Robert's journal, not the one from his desk that Rebecca had surely seen, but the small leather notebook he kept in his workshop, behind paint cans from projects finished decades ago. His handwriting, increasingly shaky, told a story that made my blood burn. March 15th. Rebecca insists on reviewing all finances. When I resist, she reminds me about Sylvia's exhaustion, says I'm being selfish, making my sick wife handle too much, feel confused after our meetings, can't remember what I agreed to. March 22nd. Tried to call Harold Brennan. Rebecca had my phone, said I'd already called him 3 times today, had I? Can't remember. Head feels like cotton. Rebecca says it's the cancer medication. Sylvia would know, but Rebecca says not to worry her. April 3rd. Signed papers today. Rebecca said they were for tax purposes. Hands shook so badly. She held the pen with me, guiding my signature. Wanted to read them first, but words kept swimming. She said Sylvia already approved everything. Did she? Must protect Sylvia. Rebecca promises she's helping protect Sylvia. The final entry, dated 2 days before his death, was barely legible. Think Rebecca is poisoning me. Can't trust my mind anymore. Put original will in safety deposit box. If something happens to me, Sylvia will know what to do. She always knows. My clever girl. Should have trusted her instead of, God forgive me, my clever girl. He'd called me that when we were young, when I'd figured out how to stretch his apprentice salary to cover rent and groceries with $17 left over for date nights. He'd believed in me even at the end, even through the fog of drugs and manipulation. I stood up. Robert's journal clutched to my chest and walked to the mirror in our hallway. The woman staring back looked ancient. Gray hair disheveled, eyes swollen from crying, shoulders bent with grief. This was what Rebecca saw, a weak-old woman easily dismissed, easily destroyed. She'd counted on me crumbling, disappearing quietly into whatever corner she allowed me. But beneath the exhausted exterior, I was still the woman who'd worked 18-hour shifts in the cardiac unit, saving lives while pregnant. I was the woman who'd built a construction empire alongside my husband, learning contracts and negotiations while nursing babies. I was the woman who'd fought cancer with him, researching treatments, challenging doctors, refusing to accept defeat. You made one mistake, Rebecca, I said to my reflection, my voice stronger than it had been in months. You didn't kill me, too. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. I'm done crying, I said when she answered. Robert left me something in the safety deposit box, and I'm going to destroy her. Patricia's response was immediate. I'll pick you up in an hour. Bring the journal. I showered, dressed in my best black suit, the one Robert loved, and picked up his key. Rebecca thought she'd won. She thought grief would paralyze me, that I'd shuffle away quietly to preserve Robert's dignity. But she'd learned about our family from documents and financial statements. She'd never understood what really made us strong. Robert and I had built our life from nothing, and if necessary, I'd burn everything to the ground before I let her profit from his murder. The woman who left the house that morning wasn't the grieving widow Rebecca expected. I was something far more dangerous, a wife seeking justice for the man who'd loved me for 40 years. The safety deposit box contained everything we needed and more. Along with the original will leaving everything to me and then our children, Robert had hidden a small recorder with 3 conversations between him and Rebecca, dated just days before his death. His voice, confused but fighting for clarity, could be heard asking, "Why do I need to change my will? Sylvia and I decided everything years ago." Rebecca's response was chilling. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows about Mark's addiction issues at work. His career will be over. Sign the papers, Robert, or your son loses everything." Patricia and I sat in her home office, surrounded by evidence boards like something from a crime drama. But this was my life spread across those boards. Bank statements, medical records, phone logs, photographs. Patricia had called in favors from former colleagues, and within 48 hours, we had a strategy that would destroy Rebecca, systematically and completely. First, we need the medical evidence, Patricia explained, connecting red strings between documents. I've arranged for Robert's body to be exhumed for a private autopsy. My friend, Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic pathologist, will test for the specific drug combinations that could trigger heart failure. It'll cost $15,000. I'd already solved that problem. I'd sold my mother's diamond earrings, the ones Robert had helped me reset for our 30th anniversary. They brought $22,000. What's next? Patricia pulled up financial records on her laptop. Rebecca made mistakes in her greed. The offshore accounts she's using, they're traceable. My contact at the Treasury Department found connections to her previous victims. We can prove a pattern of elder abuse crossing state lines. That makes it federal. We hired Marcus Thompson, a forensic accountant who specialized in estate fraud. Working from Patricia's dining room, he traced every penny Rebecca had stolen, not just from Robert, but from her previous victims. The web was intricate. Shell companies, fake invoices, property transfers, but Marcus was meticulous. She's stolen approximately $3.2 million over 8 years, he announced after 3 days of work, and she's sloppy. The paper trail is clear once you know where to look. The private investigator Patricia recommended, a former detective named Joe Garner, uncovered the most damaging evidence. He'd followed Rebecca for a week, documenting her meetings with Dr. Carver at hotels, recording their conversations at restaurants with a parabolic microphone. In one recording, Rebecca laughed about the old fool and how easy it had been to convince him his family didn't love him. Carver responded, "Just like the others. These old men are so desperate for attention they'll sign anything." But we needed more. We needed Rebecca to incriminate herself completely. I came up with the trap myself, remembering something Robert had mentioned in his journal. Rebecca didn't know about the storage unit across town where Robert kept duplicates of all important business documents. She thought she had everything. I had Patricia's colleagues send Rebecca an anonymous message. "I know what you did to Robert Kingston. Meet me at Riverside Park Friday 8 p.m. Bring $50,000 or the FBI gets copies of everything." Rebecca took the bait. Joe recorded her entire panicked conversation with Carver, where she admitted to drugging Robert, forcing him to sign documents, and being present when he died. "I didn't mean for him to die then," she said on the recording. "He was supposed to last another month until all the property transfers were complete. I must have given him too much." We presented everything to the district attorney, who happened to be Patricia's former partner at the FBI. The evidence was overwhelming: financial fraud, elder abuse, undue influence, and now potential murder charges. But we weren't done. I wanted complete destruction, not just legal justice. I reached out to Robert's business associates, men who'd respected him for decades. When they learned what Rebecca had done, they immediately froze all pending sales. Robert's company attorney, who'd been suspicious but unable to act, helped us file emergency injunctions, stopping all property transfers. The final piece was Mark. My poor son needed to know the truth before it destroyed him. I met him at a coffee shop, spreading out the evidence of how Rebecca had targeted our family before she'd even met him. The recording of her calling him useful but pathetic broke him. But it also freed him. The funeral was in 3 days. Rebecca thought she'd won. She had no idea that we'd turned her into the prey she'd always made others. The morning of Robert's funeral arrived with unseasonable rain, the sky weeping the tears I'd already exhausted. I stood before my mirror, applying makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes, my hands steady despite the storm building inside me. Today wasn't just about saying goodbye to Robert. It was about reclaiming his honor from the woman who'd stolen his final days. Patricia arrived at 7, dressed in FBI formal black, carrying a leather briefcase. "The district attorney will be there," she confirmed, along with 2 federal agents. "They'll wait for your signal." She handed me a small recording device, just in case she says something we can use. I tucked it into my purse, next to the envelope that would destroy Rebecca's world. The funeral home was already filling when we arrived. Robert's business associates, employees who'd worked for him for decades, neighbors who'd watched our children grow. They all came to pay respects to a man they'd admired. I stood at the entrance, accepting condolences with grace I didn't feel, my eyes constantly scanning for Rebecca. She arrived like a queen claiming her throne, dressed in a designer black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The Mercedes she'd bought with Robert's money gleamed in the parking lot. She walked with Mark, her hand possessively on his arm, though my son looked hollow, knowing what I'd shown him but playing along with my plan. Behind them came Jennifer and David, both watching Rebecca with barely concealed disgust. "Oh, Sylvia," Rebecca cooed, approaching me with arms outstretched. "This must be so hard for you. Don't worry, I'll handle all the arrangements from now on. You should rest." Her embrace was performative, designed for the watching crowd. Over her shoulder, I saw Dr. Carver slip in through a side door, trying to remain inconspicuous. Patricia's investigator, Joe, followed him discreetly. The service proceeded with agonizing slowness. The minister spoke about Robert's integrity, his devotion to family, his business ethics. Every word a knife in my heart, knowing how his final weeks had betrayed everything he stood for. Rebecca sat in the front row where I should have been occasionally, dabbing at dry eyes, accepting condolences as if she were the grieving widow. Harold Brennan, our family attorney, arrived late, positioning himself near the back. I'd asked him to bring the company's board members, and they stood together, their faces grim. They'd all received copies of the evidence Patricia had gathered. They knew what was coming. Robert's casket stood at the front, surrounded by flowers. The roses from our garden that I'd brought seemed small next to Rebecca's ostentatious arrangements, but they were real, grown from love, not purchased with stolen money. Inside that casket lay the man who'd been my everything, reduced to a victim in someone else's scheme. My fingers found the envelope in my purse, its edges sharp with promise. During the eulogy, Rebecca actually stood to speak. The audacity nearly broke my composure. She spoke about Robert's vision for the future and how he'd trusted her to carry on his legacy. She mentioned the changes coming to the company, the new directions she'd be taking with her inheritance. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Robert's foreman, Big Jim, actually walked out. As the service concluded and people began filing past the casket, Rebecca positioned herself as the primary mourner, accepting condolences, promising various people that she'd be in touch about Robert's wishes regarding different matters. She was already acting as if she owned everything, everyone. The reception was held in the funeral home's adjacent hall. Rebecca held court near the entrance, Dr. Carver lurking nearby, their secret celebration barely concealed. She was discussing selling the family home with a realtor she'd invited to the funeral. At my husband's funeral. The disrespect was breathtaking. Morrison, her corrupt lawyer, arrived with documents in hand. Rebecca had actually planned to conduct business at Robert's funeral, getting final signatures and transfers completed while everyone was gathered. Several people looked uncomfortable as she cheerfully discussed liquidating Robert's life's work over finger sandwiches and coffee. Then Rebecca saw me approaching Robert's casket for a final goodbye. She broke away from her audience, intercepting me with a smile sharp as glass. It was time. Rebecca's hand closed around my arm as I stood before Robert's casket, her manicured nails digging through the fabric of my dress. She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear, speaking in a whisper that carried perfectly in the hushed space. "He left everything to me, Sylvia. Everything. The house, the business, the money. It's all mine now. You get nothing. You should leave quietly, spare yourself more humiliation." I turned to face her, and something in my expression made her step back slightly. I smiled, not the broken smile of a grieving widow, but something deeper, calmer. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out the small envelope, cream-colored and unremarkable. "Rebecca," I said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I have something for Mr. Morrison." Morrison approached, clearly expecting some pathetic last plea. I handed him the envelope with steady hands. "This arrived from the district attorney's office this morning. I believe you'll want to read it immediately." His fingers fumbled opening it, his face cycling from smug confidence to confusion to absolute horror. The papers fell from his trembling hands, scattering across the floor. Before Rebecca could react, I picked up one page, reading aloud in a clear voice that carried throughout the room. "Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Rebecca Kingston, also known as Rebecca Thornton, Rebecca Matthews, and Rebecca Carver. Charges include first-degree murder, elder abuse, fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes." The room exploded into chaos. Rebecca lunged for the papers, but Patricia stepped forward, badge raised. FBI, Rebecca Kingston, you're under arrest for the murder of Robert Kingston and 3 counts of federal elder fraud. Rebecca's carefully constructed mask finally shattered. You can't prove anything. Those documents are legal. He wanted me to have everything. Her voice rose to a shriek as 2 federal agents moved through the crowd toward her. I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the funeral home's speaker system, something I'd arranged with the director that morning. Robert's voice, weak but clear, filled the room from the recordings in the safety deposit box. Rebecca, please. I don't want to sign these papers. My wife should inherit everything. We've been married 40 years. Then Rebecca's recorded response. Sign them or I'll make sure Sylvia suffers. I can make her final years hell, Robert. Is that what you want? The crowd gasped. Several people pulled out phones, recording as Rebecca tried to run. Dr. Carver, attempting to slip out the side door, was intercepted by Joe Garner and another investigator. The board members surrounded Morrison, who was desperately trying to claim he knew nothing about the fraud. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out Robert's real journal, reading his final entry aloud. I think Rebecca is poisoning me. If something happens to me, check the safety deposit box. Sylvia, my clever girl, will know what to do. Tell our children I love them. Tell Sylvia she was my everything. Mark stepped forward then, pulling off his suit jacket to reveal a wire. I've been recording everything for the past 3 days, Rebecca. Every conversation where you bragged about manipulating my father. Every threat you made about destroying my mother. The FBI has it all. Rebecca's composure completely disintegrated. You pathetic fool, she screamed at Mark. You were nothing but a stepping stone. Your whole family, weak, trusting idiots. Your father was so easy to break, so desperate to believe someone young still cared about him. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic pathologist, entered with a folder. The private autopsy results, she announced to the room. Robert Kingston had lethal levels of cardiac glycosides in his system, combined with benzodiazepines. This combination, especially given his medical history, constitutes homicide. As the federal agents approached with handcuffs, Rebecca made one last desperate attempt. Sylvia planned this. She killed him for the insurance money. Check her finances. Harold Brennan laughed bitterly. Mrs. Kingston, the real Mrs. Kingston, donated her entire inheritance to establish a foundation for elder abuse victims yesterday. She wants nothing from Robert's estate except justice. The handcuffs clicked around Rebecca's wrists with a sound like justice itself. As they led her past Robert's casket, I spoke once more. He tried to warn me. Even drugged, even dying, he protected our family. You thought you killed him, but you only killed his body, his love, his legacy, that lives on in the people who truly knew him. Rebecca's scream of rage echoed through the funeral home as they dragged her away. 6 months after Robert's funeral, I stood in the courtroom as the judge read Rebecca's sentence. Rebecca Kingston, also known by multiple aliases, this court finds you guilty on all counts. For the murder of Robert Kingston, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For 3 additional counts of elder fraud, 45 years to run concurrently. For conspiracy, racketeering, and money laundering, an additional 20 years. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through my bones. Rebecca, orange jumpsuit replacing her designer dresses, turned to look at me one last time. The venom in her eyes had dulled to desperate pleading, but I felt nothing. Dr. Thomas Carver sat 2 rows behind her, already serving his 25-year sentence, his medical license permanently revoked. Morrison had been disbarred and faced 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, Mark waited with Jennifer and David. My son looked older, worn by the weight of discovering his 5-year marriage had been a calculated lie. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Rebecca had no grounds to contest it from prison. He'd gained full custody of the children, who were receiving therapy to process their mother's crimes. Mom, he said, taking my hand, I'm so sorry. I brought her into our lives. She targeted us long before she met you, I reminded him gently. You were a victim too. The family business, once teetering on the edge of hostile takeover, had stabilized. The board, appalled by what had happened, voted unanimously to honor Robert's original succession plan. Mark would take over as CEO, with Jennifer as CFO, something Robert had always envisioned. David, 2 years sober and stronger than ever, would manage the construction sites. The Kingston name, nearly destroyed by scandal, was slowly rebuilding its reputation. I'd sold the big house. Too many poisoned memories lingered in those walls. Instead, I'd bought a cottage by the lake where Robert and I had honeymooned 41 years ago. It was small but perfect, with a garden where I'd transplanted his roses. They bloomed magnificently that spring, as if Robert himself was telling me I'd done right. The Kingston Foundation for Elder Protection had launched 3 months after the trial. Using the proceeds from the house sale and donations from Robert's business associates, we'd already helped 17 families recover assets stolen by predatory relatives or caregivers. Patricia ran it with military precision, using her FBI connections to investigate cases others had given up on. We'd hired Marcus Thompson, the forensic accountant, full-time. Even Joe Garner worked cases for us, usually pro bono. I kept Robert's workshop exactly as he'd left it. Tools hanging in their designated spots, sawdust still on the floor. Sometimes I'd sit there in the evenings, reading his old journals, the ones Rebecca never found, hidden in the false bottom of his toolbox. They painted a picture of a man deeply in love, even after 40 years. His final entry, written the morning he died, simply said, "Tell Sylvia I was always hers, only hers." Sunday dinners resumed, though the table was smaller now. Mark brought the children, who were slowly learning to laugh again. Jennifer and her daughter never missed a week. David brought his sponsor sometimes, and then his girlfriend, a kindergarten teacher who made him smile in ways I hadn't seen since before his addiction. We told stories about Robert, real ones, reclaiming his memory from the shadow Rebecca had cast. The life insurance Rebecca claimed didn't exist. Robert had hidden a policy in the safety deposit box, one he'd purchased 30 years ago and hidden from everyone, even me. $1 million, which I used to ensure our grandchildren's education, would be paid for no matter what. The rest went to the foundation. One evening, as I walked along the lake, I found myself talking to Robert. "We won, my love. She's gone, the children are healing, and your legacy is intact. The roses are beautiful this year. You'd be proud." The wind off the lake felt like an answer, like his hand in mine one more time. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood frozen in that funeral home. Grief had transformed into purpose, devastation into determination. At 63, I'd learned that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about the beginning or the middle. It's about how you honor the ending, and I'd honored ours with justice. The first anniversary of Robert's death arrived on a Thursday, just as humid as the day we lost him. But this time, I wasn't alone on the floor of his study, drowning in grief. I stood in the Kingston Foundation conference room, surrounded by families whose lives we'd helped rebuild. Martha Hendricks from San Diego, Rebecca's first known victim, had flown in for the occasion. We'd recovered nearly $300,000 for her, money that allowed her to leave the state nursing home and return to assisted living near her grandchildren. That morning, I'd visited Robert's grave, bringing fresh roses from our transplanted garden. His headstone read, "Robert Kingston, beloved husband, father, and protector. His love endures." I'd sat there for an hour, telling him about the foundation, about how Mark had discovered his father's old leadership style worked better than modern corporate methods, about how Jennifer's daughter had decided to become an elder law attorney to help protect families like ours. The truth about what happened to us could have destroyed our family's faith in love, in trust, in the bonds that hold people together. For a while, it nearly did. Mark struggled to trust anyone, questioning every kindness, every gesture of affection. Jennifer became hypervigilant about her father-in-law's finances, causing friction in her marriage until therapy helped her find balance. David nearly relapsed, the stress of the trial threatening his hard-won sobriety. But we learned something profound in our darkest moment. Evil may be cunning, but love leaves its own trail of evidence. Robert's final acts weren't those of a confused, dying man. They were the strategic moves of someone protecting his family, even as his mind was being stolen from him. The hidden key, the secret recordings, the journal in his workshop. Breadcrumbs leading us back to justice. Love had made him clever, even in his confusion. The Foundation's work revealed a horrible truth about our society. Elder abuse, particularly financial exploitation by family members, affects 1 in 10 older Americans. Billions of dollars are stolen annually from those who spent lifetimes building their modest wealth. The victims often die in poverty, confused and betrayed, their stories dismissed as family disputes rather than crimes. We'd become warriors in a battle most people didn't even know existed. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my cottage, Mark called with news. "Mom, the district attorney wants to use Dad's case to push for stronger elder protection laws. They're calling it Robert's Law. It would require additional scrutiny for last-minute will changes and mandate investigation when elderly people suddenly alter long-standing estate plans." I thought about all the Roberts out there, good men and women whose final years were being stolen by predators who saw their age as weakness, their trust as opportunity. I thought about the shame that keeps families silent, the fear of airing dirty laundry that lets criminals like Rebecca operate in shadows. We'd torn those shadows apart with truth, even when it hurt. Looking at our family photo on my mantle, taken just months before Rebecca intensified her plan, I saw what she never understood. We weren't just connected by blood or law or shared assets. We were bound by 40 years of small kindnesses, inside jokes, shared struggles, and mundane Tuesday afternoons. Rebecca could forge documents, but she couldn't forge the way Robert's eyes found mine across every crowded room for 4 decades. When greed knocks at your family's door, it often wears a familiar face. It counts on your trust, your desire to keep peace, your reluctance to suspect those who share your name or your table. Rebecca had studied our financial worth meticulously, but she'd failed to calculate the value of truth, the power of justice, and the strength that comes from honoring those we love, even after they're gone. That night, as I tended Robert's roses in the garden, I made him one more promise. Every family we protected, every elder we saved from predators, would be another rose in the garden of his legacy. What would you have done if you discovered a family member was stealing from your elderly parent? Would you have the courage to expose them, even if it meant tearing your family apart? Have you seen signs of elder abuse in your community that you've been afraid to address? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it with others. You might just save a family from becoming the next victims. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, justice, and the unbreakable bonds of real love. Remember, protecting our elderly isn't just about preserving assets. It's about honoring the generation that built the foundation we stand on today.